Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Matt from Matt's Bookshelf, and today I'm talking about The Master and Margarita by Mikhail Bulgakov. I haven't done a straight-up book review in quite a while, but I felt obligated to talk about this book because this is probably the best book I've read this year post-Ulysses. I've never read a Mikhail Bulgakov book before, and my history with Russian literature so far has made me pessimistic as to whether or not I would have actually enjoyed the book. But just as my general non-spoiler thoughts in the book, I think it's amazing. I think you should read it, and I'm hoping that my video does this book justice. So just as a little background on Mikhail Bulgakov, he wrote during the 1900s, the early 1900s, and most importantly in Russia during the Stalinist regime, especially the early stages of the Stalinist regime. He very importantly was against Stalin, and he was against the communist uprising. In his early literature, mainly in his plays, expressed sentiments for the whites, who were the pro-royalty, pro-Romanov dynasty supporters, which, when you're writing that during the early stages of the Stalin regime, is very controversial because during that time period, Stalin was mainly attacking the intelligentsia group, who were the artists, who were the educated people, and replacing them with more of your average workers. And the kind of restrictions the intelligentsia suffered at the time mainly revolved around their literature and their creative works, and if they did not abide by what Stalin and what the Communist Party wanted them to write about, then they are either shipped off to a gulag, arrested, or perhaps even killed. And therefore, for fear of their own lives and the fear of their own safety, a lot of the artists at this time period towed company line, and understandably so to a certain extent, but not Mikhail Bulgakov, and this is the source for The Master and Margarita. So this is a general plot synopsis. There's going to be some spoilers in my general review for it, but I'm going to save my spoiler section for later on in the video, and I'll make it clear when that is. The book mainly follows the devil, who in this book goes by the name Professor Voland, and his demons as they journey through Moscow during the Stalinist regime and confront many of the people of the intelligentsia class living in Moscow at this time, and sort of confronting them for their hypocrisies, for their lack of genuine interest in the arts, and therefore punishing for their falsehoods. But then about halfway through the book, it takes a dramatic turn where you are introduced to the titular Master and Margarita, who the Master is an author who is writing a book about Pontius Pilate and Jesus, which when you first start reading the book, you get these random Pontius Pilate chapters, and you don't really understand why they are there in the first place. But then one of the characters named Ivan Nikolaevich meets the Master. He starts talking about the same book that the chapters that you're reading from. And he is in love with a woman named Margarita, who is his muse in many ways. She is his biggest supporter in his writing, despite the fact that he's writing controversial works. And it very much parallels Bulgakov's own life, where he was writing controversial works that the rest of the intelligentsia class did not agree with because they are going against the communist propaganda. Despite the adversity that he confronted, he still stayed true to his own morals and to his own creative impulses. But at the same time, it would cost him. For the Master, he's thrown into an insane asylum, and for Bulgakov himself, he was constantly scrounging for money. He wasn't very successful as a writer during his time period, and he's always living under the fear that maybe one day the Soviet police would come knocking on his door and taking him away for his rebellious writing. But that never happened, fortunately. And so you meet the Master and Margarita, and mainly the character of Margarita deals a lot with Voland and his demons as they journey through what I think is hell and purgatory, and on her mission to be reunited with the Master. So the main theme from what I extrapolated from Master and Margarita is the price of artistic integrity, and is it worth it in the long run despite the potential of facing adversity from those around you. And there's a quote from Robert Caro which reads roughly, "Power does not corrupt, it reveals." And that quote is mainly targeted towards the dictator or leader himself or herself, but I think in a certain extent it also applies to the people who are living under the regime. And as you see in The Master and Margarita, many of the characters of the intelligentsia class that Voland and his demons confront completely are able to sell themselves out for towing company line, basically, while the Master stays true to his artistic integrity and is completely isolated for it. And when confronted with the fear of your own safety, you see that many of the characters, both in The Master and Margarita and in Bulgakov's real life, were totally fine with giving up on their own ideals for safety, for success potentially. But on the other hand, Bulgakov and the Master himself writes great fiction, and Bulgakov is remembered much more than many of the other intelligentsia during that time period. And although Stalin was objectively a horrible person and Voland himself is the devil, I think what Bulgakov is trying to say is that potentially a good that was done, this is very, very loose good when I mean good here, is that the oppression that both Voland and Stalin were able to create was able to reveal the true falsehoods of a lot of the artists in the Soviet Union at the time. Although a lot of evil was done, that evil also created the Master and Margarita, and it was able to reveal who are the true artists, who are the true masters, and who's going to sell themselves out for safety or for success. And Voland, despite being the devil, is also very charismatic and charming in this book, and especially in comparison to like the false intelligentsia of that he has to deal with. And there's a quote that I'm going to read right now of one of these people in hell with Voland as Margarita's watching them. And during this time period, the Stalinist regime was very much focused on cutting out religion from Russian society. And you see in the first chapter of The Master and Margarita how Berlioz is adamant that there is no God, there is no Jesus, or any religion whatsoever. And Ivan is also a believer in this as well, but he doesn't really know why. He just, again, toes company line. That's what he's been told, and that's just what he believes. And Voland specifically kills Berlioz probably because he's so confident and so prideful in his own beliefs, even though those beliefs are inherently come from his oppression from the government at the time. But there's another great quote, as I was saying, where he's confronting one of these characters in hell, and Voland says this: "Everything came to pass, did it not?" Voland went on, looking into the head's eyes. "The head was cut off by a woman. The meeting did not take place, and I am living in your apartment. This is a fact, and fact is the most stubborn thing in the world. But we are now interested in what follows, and not in this already accomplished fact. You have always been an ardent preacher of the theory that, on cutting off his head, life ceases in a man. He turns to ashes and goes into non-being. I have the pleasure of informing you, in the presence of my guests, though they serve as proof of quite a different theory, that your theory is both solid and clever. However, one theory is as good as another. There is also one which holds that it will be given to each according to his faith. Let it come true, you into non-being, and from the cup into which you are to be transformed, I will joyfully drink to being." And that, of course, comes when character Mikhail Alexandrovich gets decapitated, but he still continues to live, even though it defies all logic. That's also a persisting theme in Master and Margarita, is fantasy and reality. And another strength that Bulgakov has is in his descriptions, because at its core, The Master and Margarita is very much a fantasy book, and has some of the most beautiful descriptions of scenery I've ever read in my life. And the way he's able to both describe Voland and his demons and the settings themselves, which range from Moscow to hell and heaven, potentially purgatory, ancient Jerusalem and Rome, and it's incredibly impressive. And I'm going to read one of my favorite description sections as followed. This takes place when Margarita has already attained some of her witch powers and is flying around the forested areas outside of the main city. Turning her head up and to the left, the flying woman admired the way the moon madly raced back over her towards Moscow, and at the same time strangely stayed in its place, so that there could be clearly seen on it something mysterious, dark, a dragon, or a little humpbacked horse, its sharp muzzle turned to the abandoned city. Here the thought came to Margarita that, in fact, there was no need for her to drive her broom so furiously, so that she was depriving herself of the opportunity of seeing anything properly, of reveling properly in her own flight. Something told her that she would be waited for in the place she was flying to, and that there was no need for her to become bored with this insane speed and heights. Margarita turned the broom's bristles forward so that its tail rose up, and slowing way down headed right for the earth. This downward guide, as on airy sled, gave her the greatest pleasure. The earth rose to meet her, and in its hitherto formless black density, the charms and secrets of the earth on a moonlit night revealed themselves. The earth was coming to her, and Margarita was already enveloped in the scent of greening forests. Margarita was flying just above the mist of a dewy meadow and over a pond. Under Margarita sang a chorus of frogs, and from somewhere far away, stirring in her heart deeply, for some reason, came the noise of a train. Soon Margarita saw it. It was crawling slowly like a caterpillar, spraying sparks into the air. Going ahead of it, Margarita passed over yet another watery mirror, in which a second moon floated over her feet, dropped down lower still, and went on, her feet nearly touching the tops of the huge pines. So now I want to get fully into the spoiler section of the Master and Margarita, and I want to start off by talking about Pontius Pilate and his relationship to Jesus. So in the second chapter of the book is the first chapter of Pontius Pilate's story written by the Master, or also potentially that was what really happened, and it was observed by Volan, the devil. He meets Jesus, and before he sends Jesus to execution, Jesus, who goes by Hanazrai or something, I think Hanazrai, talks to him about his peaceful philosophy on life, and that he does not believe that people are inherently evil, and he's surprised that Judas actually betrayed him and didn't even consider for a fact that someone would have betrayed him, because he's so adamant that people are pure at heart. This philosophy sticks with Pontius Pilate throughout the remainder of his chapters, and there's a great scene towards the end of his chapters where it's after the death of Jesus, and he's sort of lost mentally and spiritually because Jesus' philosophy is stuck with him, and he feels guilt for killing him, but also at the same time he showed him mercy by giving him poisoned wine so he didn't have to die, so he didn't have to suffer longer on the cross. And I'll read Pontius Pilate's thoughts as followed, as he sits in his home and dwells on the events that happened earlier that day, which was his confrontation with Jesus. It went without saying that today's execution proved to be a sheer misunderstanding. Here, this philosopher, who had thought up such an incredibly absurd thing as that all men are good, was walking beside him, therefore he was alive. And of course, it would be terrible even to think that one could execute such a man. There had been no execution. That was the loveliness of his journey up the stairway of the moon. There was as much free time as I needed, and the storm would come only towards evening, and cowardice was undoubtedly one of the most terrible vices. Thus spoke Yeshua ha-Nazrai. No philosopher, I disagree with you. It is the most terrible vice. Yes, Pilate moaned and sobbed in his sleep. Of course he would. In the morning he still would not. But now, at night, after weighing everything, he would agree to ruin it. He would do everything to save the decidedly innocent, mad dreamer and healer from execution. No, we shall always be together, said the ragged wandering philosopher in his dream, who, for some unknown reason, had crossed paths with the equestrian of the golden spear. Where there's one of us, straightway there will be the other. Whenever I am remembered, you will at once be remembered too. I, the foundling, the son of unknown parents, and you, the son of an astrologer king, and a miller's daughter, the beautiful Pila. So again, going back to the duality of good and evil, Pontius Pilate is accepting that his relationship with Jesus will ultimately be a relationship between good and evil. Jesus being morally good, the one who believes that people are inherently good, and Pontius Pilate being the evil procurator who sentenced him to execution. But very interestingly enough, his philosophy sticks with Pontius Pilate. Even though the man himself has changed, he is not remembered in history as someone who was actually impacted by the teachings of Jesus. And then later on in this chapter, he's confronted with Matthew Levy, who is the disciple Matthew, who is an ardent believer in what Jesus preaches and is an ardent follower. But when he learns that Judas was the betrayer, Matthew Levi specifically says that he wants to kill Matthew Levi and that he wants to kill Pontius Pilate. So ultimately, history remembers Matthew Levi as being the loyal servant of Jesus and Pontius Pilate as being a villain, but it is ultimately Pontius Pilate who in real life, at least the real life according to the Master and Margarita, who is the most impacted by Jesus' philosophy that all men are inherently good, and potentially this could lead to a less violent life for Pontius Pilate, whereas Matthew Levi is, hell-bent on murdering, but history does not remember it that way. And the theme of history rewriting itself is also prevalent in the Master and Margarita and in the Soviet Union at the time. There's infamous pictures of Stalin in a picture with a person and then erasing that person from the picture, rewriting history, and also the Master and Margarita. The mischief that Volin and his demons cause is rewritten as being not caused by the devil or anything, because in the society, the devil cannot exist because the government says that religion does not exist. So everything that they cause is explained away through very shady practical reasons that don't really make sense, but no one can really question it. And you see the same thing with Matthew Levi and Pontius Pilate. And finally, I just want to talk about the end of Master and Margarita, mainly the Master's ascension, basically, into a heaven where he can write all the time with his wife Margarita, and how it relates to Bulgakov himself, because at the time he was writing this, he was dying of a hereditary disease, and he knew he was dying. And this book was actually published posthumously decades after his death, when his family decided it was safer to publish a book and without being fear of being harassed by the government. And I want to read the section where the Master, the last section, I should say, of the Master and Margarita with those two characters. "Listen to the stillness," Margarita said to the Master, and the sand rustled under her bare feet. "Listen and enjoy what you were not given in life. Peace. Look there ahead in your eternal home, which you have been given as a reward. I can already see the Venetian window and the twisting vine. It climbs right up to the roof. Here is your home, your eternal home. I know that in the evening you will be visited by those who love you, those who interest you, and who will never trouble you. They will play for you. They will sing for you. You will see what light is in the room when the candles are burning. You will fall asleep, having put on your greasy and eternal nightcap. You will fall asleep with a smile on your lips. Sleep will strengthen you. You will reason wisely, and you will no longer be able to drive me away. I will watch over your sleep." Thus spoke Margarita, walking with the Master towards their eternal home, and it seemed to the Master that Margarita's words flowed in the same way as the stream they had left behind flowed and whispered. And the Master's memory, the Master's anxious, needled memory, began to fade. Someone was setting the Master free, as he himself had just set free the hero he had created. This hero had gone into the abyss, gone irrevocably, the son of the astrologer king, forgiven on the eve of Sunday, the cruel fifth procurator of Judea, the equestrian Pontius Pilate. And this section is very beautiful in many ways. In one way, I interpret it as Bulgakov's accepting of his mortality and the fact that he's going to die somewhat soon, but also what his dream of heaven is like, and it's just peace. It's just the time to write what he wants to write without fear of his own health, without fear of being harassed by the Stalinist regime, without fear of being ostracized by the intelligentsia community, which he should belong to, and he can just live peacefully and write whatever he wants. And that is incredibly beautiful to me, and it's a great way to end the Master and Margarita. So thank you for making it this far into the video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope I did this book justice. It's my first read, so a lot of my interpretations I accept could be wrong, because I don't really know too much about Bulgakov himself and of the time. So if I said anything that's wrong or incorrect, or if you want to just talk about your own interpretations of the book, I'd love to hear what you have to say, because this book is incredible. It's impacted me. It's one of the most impactful books I read this year, up there with Ulysses, Portrait of the Artist, and The Leopard. And yes, I would like to read more Bulgakov at some point, and I'd love to reread this book again at some point. The reading list goes on and on. The more I read, the more books I want to read, and I'm just glad that I get to read books like this, because holy hell, I had no idea where it was going, and I loved every second of it. So thank you. Check out my friends, check out my other videos if you want, and I hopefully see you for the next video. Thank you, and bye.